Marcus Reed knelt beside the pulsating violet fungus, carefully extracting a sample with his collection tools. The specimen glowed with an internal bioluminescence, casting eerie shadows across the forest floor of Thraxia. As the expedition's lead botanist, he'd insisted on investigating this particular grove despite the approaching dusk and his commander's warnings. Just 5 more minutes, Alvarez, he had promised over the comm link. That had been 40 minutes ago, and now his communication device emitted nothing but static. The dense canopy of crystalline trees above him had likely disrupted the signal, a common problem on this alien world, but one that felt suddenly more ominous as darkness crept through the forest. Marcus sealed his sample vial and checked his positioning system. The screen flickered with interference before displaying coordinates that made no sense. He was supposedly 5 kilometers underground. Great. Should have listened to Alvarez, he muttered, rising to his feet and brushing phosphorescent spores from his expedition suit. The biodiversity on Thraxia was unprecedented, but so were the dangers. 3 previous expeditions had lost members to the planet's hazards. A sound, like metal striking crystal, echoed through the trees. Marcus froze, hand instinctively moving to the stunner at his hip. The sound came again, closer. And then another, from a different direction. And another. They emerged from between the luminous tree trunks with such fluid grace that Marcus momentarily forgot his fear in scientific awe. Bipedal but impossibly slender, with elongated limbs and skin that shifted colors like liquid opals. Their eyes, 3 on each face, arranged in a triangle, glowed amber in the gathering darkness. The Viwexari. The indigenous species that previous expeditions had only glimpsed from a distance. Considered pre-technological and potentially hostile. Those reports seemed accurate on both counts, Marcus thought as he noted their primitive stone-tipped spears and the way they moved to surround him with practiced precision. "Hello," Marcus said, keeping his voice calm and his hands visible. "I'm just a scientist. I mean no harm." The nearest Viwexari tilted its elongated head, the colors of its skin pulsing in what might have been curiosity or aggression. It made a series of clicking sounds that reverberated in Marcus's chest before lunging forward with unexpected speed. Pain exploded across the back of Marcus's skull. As consciousness faded, he felt multiple hands grabbing him, lifting him. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the twin moons of Thraxia rising above the crystal forest. He awoke to firelight and pain. Marcus blinked, disoriented, as his surroundings came into focus. He was in a clearing dominated by a massive stone altar, its surface carved with intricate celestial patterns. Dozens of Viwexari moved around him in coordinated patterns, their skin now uniformly midnight blue with pinpricks of light that mimicked constellations. He tried to move, only to discover he was bound upright to some kind of pole. Rough vines cut into his wrists, and his expedition suit had been partially stripped away, leaving his chest and arms exposed to the cool night air. An elder Viwexari, distinguished by elaborate scarification across its torso, approached. In its 6-fingered hand was a bowl containing luminescent paste. With ritualistic precision, it began painting symbols across Marcus's exposed skin. "This is a misunderstanding," Marcus said, his scientific mind still analyzing even as fear coursed through him. "I'm not an enemy. I'm a researcher." The Viwexari gave no indication of understanding. Around him, the tribe had begun a rhythmic chanting that made the ground beneath them vibrate. The patterns of their skin lights shifted in synchrony, creating the disorienting illusion that Marcus was surrounded by moving stars. Understanding dawned with horrifying clarity as he observed the ceremonial preparations. The astronomical alignment above, the ritual markings, the altar positioned directly in the center of the clearing. He wasn't just a captive. He was a sacrifice. The elder Viwexari raised an obsidian knife that caught the moonlight and scattered it like shattered stars. The chanting intensified. Marcus struggled against his bonds, his mind racing through options that dwindled with each passing second. Then, abruptly, the chanting faltered and died. A ripple of movement passed through the gathered tribe as they dropped to their knees in perfect unison, their skin lights dimming to a respectful glow. Through the smoke of the ceremonial fires stepped a figure unlike any Marcus had seen. Taller than the others, with skin that shimmered with the deep blue of interstellar space, punctuated by swirls of cosmic dust and stellar formations. A crown of crystalline structures floated above her head, defying gravity. Her eyes, 5 of them, arranged in a perfect pentagon, locked onto Marcus with undisguised curiosity. Queen Lysandra of the Vyexari had arrived, and the nature of Marcus's captivity was about to change completely. Silence descended upon the clearing as Queen Lysandra approached, her movements liquid and graceful despite her towering height. The tribal Vyexari remained prostrate, their skin lights dimmed to mere whispers of luminescence in her presence. Only the ceremonial fires dared compete with the radiance of her cosmic-patterned skin. Marcus held his breath as she circled his bound form, her 5 eyes methodically scanning him from head to toe. Unlike the tribespeople, her gaze held something beyond religious fervor. There was calculation, intelligence, and unmistakable curiosity. "Fascinating," she said, her voice resonating not through the air but directly in Marcus's mind, a telepathic intrusion that felt like cool water flowing through his thoughts. A human researcher, so far from your Earth. The shock of hearing perfect English, or rather, feeling it, momentarily overrode Marcus's fear. "You know what I am?" The corner of her mouth, lined with delicate bioluminescent patterns, curved upward. "The Vyexari ascendancy has been monitoring your species' clumsy first steps into the cosmos for decades. Though you are the first to wander into our domain, alone." She extended one long-fingered hand toward his face. Each digit ended in a crystalline claw that refracted moonlight into prismatic patterns. Marcus flinched as she traced a line from his temple to his jaw, her touch leaving a trail of tingling sensation. "The provincial tribes still practice the old ways," she continued, gesturing dismissively at the gathered Vyexari. "They believe sacrificing rare creatures during the celestial convergence brings prosperity. Primitives with primitive beliefs." The elder Vyexari who had been preparing to sacrifice Marcus rose slightly, keeping his head bowed. He uttered a series of melodic clicks and whistles that clearly constituted language. Lysandra's skin darkened, the stellar patterns intensifying to an almost painful brightness. "No," she replied aloud, her actual voice a haunting symphony of tones that made the crystal trees at the edge of the clearing resonate in harmony. "This human is not for your ritual." The elder gestured toward the night sky, where the twin moons of Theraxia were drawing closer together in what Marcus now understood was an eclipse, the celestial convergence. "Your gods will understand," Lysandra said with finality. She turned back to Marcus, switching to telepathic communication. "They believe you were sent by cosmic deities for their offering. Ironic, since you came for mere plant samples. How did you?" "Your surface thoughts are simple to access," she interrupted. "Your mission, your scientific curiosity, your fear, all transparent." She tilted her head, studying him with renewed interest. "But there are depths to your mind I cannot immediately penetrate." "Curious." The tribal elder made a sound of protest, more insistent this time. Several warriors shifted, their skin lights pulsing with agitation. The tension in the clearing thickened until it seemed to gain physical weight. Lysandra turned, drawing herself to her full height. The crown of floating crystals above her head began rotating faster, emitting a low humming sound that vibrated through Marcus's bones. "By right of the stellar throne and the laws of cosmic dominion, I claim this human as property of the Vyexari ascendancy." Her voice boomed across the clearing, no longer musical but thunderous. "His knowledge and biology belong to the crown. His fate is mine to determine." As she spoke, the crystals of her crown emitted beams of light that converged on Marcus. The vines binding him dissolved into glittering dust, and he nearly collapsed as circulation returned painfully to his limbs. Only Lyssandra's telekinetic intervention, a pressure around his body like an invisible harness, kept him upright. The elder Viwexari sank back to the ground, defeated. The warriors lowered their weapons, their skinlights dimming to indicate submission. Whatever hierarchy existed among the Viwexari, Lysandra clearly stood at its apex. What happens now? Marcus asked, massaging his wrists where the vines had cut into them. Lysandra regarded him with an expression he couldn't decipher, something between scientific interest and possessive satisfaction. Now, human botanist Marcus Reed, you come with me to the Citadel. She gestured upward, and for the first time, Marcus noticed a distortion in the night sky, a massive structure hovering above the cloud layer, nearly invisible except for occasional glints of light along its edges. Your species has much to offer mine, and you will be the conduit of that exchange. Before Marcus could respond, Lysandra extended her hand toward him. Not as a gesture of greeting or assistance, but as a declaration of ownership. Your life among the stars begins now, she said, as the celestial convergence reached its peak above them, bathing the clearing in ethereal light. And your old existence ends. A field of energy enveloped them both, and Marcus felt his body becoming lighter than air. As they began rising toward the invisible citadel, the tribal Viwexari resumed their chanting below, no longer for a sacrifice, but in reverence to their queen and her new, alien acquisition. The last thing Marcus saw before they penetrated the cloud layer was the elder Viwexari watching them ascend, its 3 eyes gleaming with what might have been relief, resentment, or perhaps something far more dangerous, prophecy. The ascension was not what Marcus expected. Rather than the vertigo of flight, it felt more like reality itself folded around them. One moment they stood in the clearing, the next, they materialized within a vast chamber whose boundaries seemed to shift and breathe like a living organism. Marcus staggered as his feet touched solid ground, his inner ear struggling to adjust. What just happened? Dimensional translocation, Lysandra replied casually, moving away from him with that fluid grace that made her seem more aquatic than terrestrial. Your primitive species calls it teleportation, though that term barely scratches the surface of the physics involved. For the first time, Marcus had a moment to truly observe his surroundings. The citadel defied conventional architecture. Walls of translucent crystal curved overhead to form a dome that displayed the stars with perfect clarity, yet somehow magnified them so that nebulae in distant galaxies were visible in breathtaking detail. The floor beneath his feet rippled with patterns that mimicked cosmic dust clouds, occasionally coalescing into recognizable stellar formations before dispersing again. Welcome to the heart of the ascendancy, Lysandra said, gesturing around them. Few non-Viwexari have ever seen this place. Fewer still have lived to remember it. The implied threat wasn't lost on Marcus. I'm honored, he replied carefully, though I'd prefer to return to my expedition team. They'll be searching for me. Lysandra's skin rippled with colors that suggested amusement. Your team believes you dead, consumed by the planet's predatory flora. They've already begun mourning rituals aboard your vessel. What? How could you possibly know that? She gestured toward a floating sphere in the center of the chamber. It pulsed with energy, and within its translucent surface, Marcus could see images of the research ship Horizon. Captain Alvarez was addressing the crew, her face grim as she announced the loss of their botanist. We monitor all visitors to our system, Lysandra explained. Your primitive communication technologies are simple to intercept and manipulate. Marcus felt a surge of anger cutting through his fear. Send me back. They need to know I'm alive. Your life is no longer yours to direct, Lysandra said with calm finality. Her 5 eyes fixed on him with renewed intensity. You belong to the ascendancy now. More specifically, to me. Before Marcus could protest, the chamber door dilated open, and 3 Viwexari entered. Unlike the tribal members, These wore fitted garments composed of material that seemed both metallic and organic, shifting colors to match their surroundings. Their skin patterns were more subdued, more controlled, clearly members of Lyssandra's advanced civilization. One approached the queen, bowing deeply before speaking in the musical language of the Vyxari. Though Marcus couldn't understand the words, the tone conveyed urgency. Lyssandra's expression darkened. "Already?" she said, momentarily forgetting to use telepathy with Marcus. She glanced at him, then addressed the messenger again with sharp, commanding tones. The messenger bowed and retreated, followed by the others. "It seems your arrival has accelerated certain events," Lysandra said, returning her attention to Marcus. "The council demands an audience to discuss my acquisition of you." "Council? There's a governing body that might overrule your decision?" Marcus asked, hope kindling. Lysandra's skin flashed with patterns that conveyed something between amusement and irritation. "The Stellar Council advises the crown. They do not command it." She moved toward him, close enough that he could feel the strange energy emanating from her skin. "But politics requires compromise, and you, human, represent a significant disruption to established protocols." She gestured, and a section of the wall morphed into a reflective surface. Marcus nearly jumped at his own reflection. His expedition suit was tattered, his face was smeared with the tribal Vyxari's ritual paint, and his eyes were wide with a combination of fear and wonder. "You cannot appear before the council like this," Lysandra declared. "You will be prepared." Two silent attendants materialized from recessed areas of the chamber. They approached Marcus with measured steps, carrying containers of what appeared to be liquid crystal. "What are they going to do?" Marcus asked, backing away. "Merely cleanse and prepare you," Lysandra said dismissively. "The council must see you as I do, a valuable specimen worthy of study, not some primitive creature dragged from the forest floor." "I'm not a specimen," Marcus insisted, his scientific pride overriding caution. "I'm a xenobotanist with 2 PhDs and over 50 published research papers on extraterrestrial flora." Lysandra's skin rippled with what might have been genuine surprise. She approached him again, this time reaching out to touch his forehead with a single crystalline claw. The contact sent a jolt of awareness through Marcus's consciousness. "Interesting," she murmured, withdrawing her touch. "Your mind contains more complexity than I initially detected. Perhaps you will prove more useful than merely biological samples and technological insights." The attendants surrounded Marcus, beginning their work without waiting for his consent. The liquid crystal they applied to his skin felt cool at first, then warm as it dissolved the tribal markings and forest grime. It penetrated the torn fabric of his expedition suit, repairing and transforming it into something that resembled Vyxari attire while still accommodating his human physiology. Throughout the process, Lysandra observed with clinical detachment. "The council session begins in what you would measure as 1 hour," she said finally. "In that time, you will be instructed in basic protocol. Speak only when addressed directly. Answer truthfully but concisely. Your future in the ascendancy depends on the impression you make." As the attendants completed their work, Marcus caught his reflection again and barely recognized himself. The new attire seemed to shift subtly with his movements, adapting to his form while emitting a faint luminescence similar to the Vyxari themselves. "Why am I really here?" he asked, meeting Lysandra's pentagonal gaze. "What do you want from me?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Lysandra's features. Her skin dimmed momentarily, the cosmic patterns receding into deeper blue. "What I want," she said with unusual softness, "is to prevent extinction, yours and ours." She turned toward the stellar display above them. "The council awaits, human. And with it, your true purpose in the cosmos." Part 4, The Conspiracy. The Stellar Council chamber exceeded even the grandeur of Lysandra's reception hall. A massive dodecahedron of crystal and living metal, each facet displaying a different stellar phenomenon, nebulae being born, stars dying, black holes consuming matter in hypnotic spirals. At the center floated a platform where 12 VYXRE counselors sat in a perfect circle, their skin patterns subdued to formal configurations that Marcus interpreted as the equivalent of ceremonial robes. Lysandra guided him forward, her hand occasionally brushing his back in what felt less like affection and more like steering a valuable but potentially troublesome possession. They stopped at the edge of the platform, which hovered several meters above the actual floor. "The crown presents itself to the council," announced a herald whose skin rippled with official insignia. "Queen Lysandra of the Fifth Stellar Dynasty, Sovereign of the Ascendancy, Keeper of the Cosmic Flame." And the herald paused, clearly uncertain how to introduce the human. Marcus Reed, Lysandra supplied telepathically, her mental voice carrying only to him. "Xenobotanist of Earth." "And her terrestrial acquisition," the herald concluded. A counselor with intricate geometric patterns across its elongated skull rose first. "Your Radiance," the council questions the wisdom of bringing an unprocessed alien directly into the Citadel. "Containment protocols exist for a reason." "Counselor Thelix always begins with protocol," Lysandra said privately to Marcus. Aloud, she answered, "The human poses no biological threat. His species has been thoroughly analyzed from previous encounters." "Previous encounters?" Marcus whispered, but Lysandra silenced him with a subtle gesture. Another counselor, distinguished by a scar-like formation that bisected all three of its eyes, leaned forward. "The true concern is not biological but political. The Treaty of Seven Suns explicitly forbids interference with developing species. Taking a specimen violates Article 4. I invoked the right of sovereign acquisition," Lysandra countered, her crown crystals rotating faster. "The human was facing death at the hands of the tribal VYXRE. My intervention was merciful." "Mercy or opportunity," countered a third counselor whose skin displayed unusual red undertones. "The council has not forgotten your research proposals, Your Radiance. 3 times we rejected your request to study human neurophysiology. Now you bring us a living subject and claim coincidence?" Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. He was beginning to understand his position, not just a scientific curiosity but potentially crucial to whatever research Lysandra had been prohibited from conducting. The scarred counselor turned its attention directly to Marcus. "Human, are you here willingly?" Before Marcus could answer, Lysandra's telepathic voice filled his mind with urgent intensity. "Choose your words carefully. Your life depends on them. As does the future of both our species." "I was rescued from certain death," Marcus said cautiously. "For that, I'm grateful to Queen Lysandra. As for willingness..." He paused, acutely aware of the political currents swirling around him. "I'm a scientist. Given the choice between death and the opportunity to learn about an advanced alien civilization, there's no choice at all." His answer seemed to satisfy some counselors while irritating others. The debate continued for what felt like hours, touching on treaties, precedents, and scientific ethics. Throughout it all, Lysandra maintained regal composure, though Marcus sensed increasing tension in her posture. Finally, the head counselor, a VYXRE so ancient that its skin had faded to pale lavender, raised a gnarled hand for silence. "The council recognizes the Queen's right of acquisition but imposes conditions," it announced. "The human will remain in the Citadel under supervision. Any research involving him must be documented and submitted for review. If at any point he wishes to return to his people, that request must be honored." Lysandra's skin flashed with patterns that Marcus couldn't interpret, but she bowed in acceptance. "The Crown acknowledges the Council's wisdom." As they were escorted from the chamber, Marcus felt Lysandra's mood darkening. Once they were alone in a corridor that seemed to bend through dimensions beyond normal space, she turned to him. "You performed well," she said, though her tone suggested it was merely adequate. The council is more suspicious than I anticipated. Perhaps because you have ulterior motives? Marcus ventured, emboldened by the council's protective measures. What research were they talking about? Lyssandra's eyes narrowed, all five focusing on him with laser intensity. For a moment, he thought she might strike him or use her telepathic abilities to punish his insolence. Instead, she gestured toward a viewing port that materialized in the corridor wall. "Look," she commanded. Beyond the port lay a laboratory unlike any Marcus had seen. VYXRE scientists moved among equipment that defied human technological understanding. But what caught his attention were the subjects of their study, dozens of crystalline structures floating in containment fields, each pulsing with fading light. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "The extinction of my species," Lysandra replied, her telepathic voice tinged with genuine anguish. "Every VYXRE carries a crystalline core that houses our consciousness and life force. For 8 generations, those cores have been degrading at birth. Each generation grows weaker, our lifespans shorter, our connection to the cosmic energies that sustain us more tenuous." She placed a hand against the port, her fingers splayed as if reaching for those dying crystals. "Your species possesses something we do not, neurological adaptability. Your brains forge new connections constantly, healing and evolving throughout your lives. We believe this trait might hold the key to rejuvenating our cores. And that's why you claimed me? For my adaptable human brain?" Lysandra turned to him, and for the first time, Marcus saw beyond her regal facade to the desperation beneath. "Not just for study, Marcus Reed. The Council doesn't know the full extent of the crisis. My scientists estimate we have less than 1 generation before the VYXRE become functionally extinct." A door at the far end of the corridor slid open, revealing the red-tinged counselor in urgent conversation with several VYXRE warriors. They fell silent at the sight of Lysandra and Marcus. "Your Radiance," the counselor said with a bow that seemed more perfunctory than respectful. "I was just discussing enhanced security measures for your human guest." Lysandra's skin darkened with suspicion. "The Council has already set its conditions, Counselor Mevis. Security arrangements fall under Crown authority." "Of course," Mevis replied, but something in the counselor's posture triggered Marcus's instincts for danger. The warriors behind Mevis seemed poised for action rather than ceremony. As they passed the group, Marcus felt Lysandra subtly position herself between him and the counselor, a protective gesture that contradicted her earlier treatment of him as mere property. "Politics is a deadlier game than sacrifice," she said once they were out of earshot. "Mevis leads a faction that believes the ascendancy should abandon research and focus on spiritual transcendence. They see our species decline as a natural progression toward shedding physical form." "And you disagree?" Vehemently, Lysandra replied. "Which makes you, Marcus Reed, the most valuable and dangerous asset in my kingdom." As they continued through the shifting corridors of the Citadel, Marcus realized his fate had become entangled with not just a queen's will but an entire civilization's survival. And somewhere in that realization, the line between captive and collaborator began to blur irrevocably. 3 months passed in the Citadel with the fluid ambiguity of a dream. For Marcus, days blended into one another as he divided his time between Lysandra's laboratories and her private chambers, where their conversations gradually evolved from interrogations into something approaching intellectual exchange. Today, he stood before a holographic display of his own brain, watching as VYXRE scientists highlighted neural pathways that interested them. His initial fear of becoming a laboratory specimen had given way to scientific fascination with their research. The VYXRE approach to neuroscience transcended human understanding, incorporating quantum principles and dimensional theories that made Earth's most advanced studies seem primitive by comparison. "The compatibility index has improved by 12%, announced Nairos, the lead scientist and one of the few VYXRE who treated Marcus as a colleague rather than a curiosity. The human neural template is responding to the synthetic core matrix. Lysandra entered the laboratory, her presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. The scientists bowed, their skinlights dimming respectfully. Over these months, Marcus had learned to read VYXRE emotional states through their bioluminescent patterns, and today, Lysandra's indicated tension beneath her regal composure. "Leave us," she commanded, and the laboratory cleared within moments. Once alone, Lysandra approached the holographic brain, studying it with all 5 of her eyes. "Progress," she observed. "But not enough, and not quickly enough. The integration of human neural adaptability into your crystalline cores is unprecedented," Marcus reminded her. "Even with your technology, it's remarkable we've achieved compatible resonance at all." Lysandra's skin darkened. "Counselor Mevis has called for an emergency session. His faction claims I've violated the conditions of your retention by allowing you too much freedom within the Citadel." "That's just a pretext," Marcus said, having become increasingly adept at navigating VYXRE politics. "He's making a move against your research, not me." "Against my throne," Lysandra corrected, her crown crystals rotating with agitation. "Mevis believes the transcendence path is our destiny, to abandon physical form entirely and exist as pure consciousness among the stars. My efforts to save our physical existence contradict his spiritual doctrine." Marcus had heard enough about the transcendence path to understand its appeal to a dying species. Why fight extinction when you could evolve beyond it? But he also understood Lysandra's opposition. Transcendence remained theoretical, while extinction was imminent and certain. "We need more time," he said, deactivating the holographic display. "Another month could make the difference in stabilizing the synthetic cores. Time is precisely what Mevis intends to deny us." Lysandra moved to a viewing port, gazing out at the planet below. "The council session is scheduled for tomorrow. If he succeeds, you will be returned to your people, and my research terminated." Marcus felt an unexpected pang at the thought of returning to Earth. 3 months ago, it would have been his dearest wish. Now, his thoughts were interrupted by a sudden alert that pulsed through the Citadel's communication system. Lysandra's skin flashed with surprise as she accessed the incoming information telepathically. "Impossible," she whispered. "What is it?" Marcus asked. The viewing port's image shifted, zooming in on a section of Theraxia's orbit. There, a vessel of unmistakably human design approached the planet. "The horizon has returned," Lysandra said, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. "With reinforcements." Marcus stared at the image in disbelief. The research vessel Horizon now traveled alongside a larger military-class ship bearing Earth Defense Force insignia. After 3 months, they hadn't abandoned the search for their lost botanist. "They're hailing all frequencies with your image and DNA signature," Lysandra continued. "They know you're alive, Marcus. Somehow, they know." A memory flashed in Marcus's mind, his final conversation with Lysandra in the council chamber 3 months ago. Any research involving him must be documented and submitted for review. If at any point he wishes to return to his people, that request must be honored. "Mevis," Marcus realized aloud. "He's been monitoring your research reports to the council. He must have transmitted information to my people, knowing they would come for me." "A clever maneuver," Lysandra acknowledged, her tone suggesting reluctant admiration for the political strategy. "By bringing your people here, he forces my hand before the research is complete. I must either return you as the treaty demands or risk interspecies conflict. Either outcome ends my research and weakens my position." The alert chimed again, more urgently. "The human vessels are requesting communication," said an automated voice. "They claim to have detected their missing crew member aboard the Citadel." Lysandra turned to Marcus, her 5 eyes studying him with an intensity that transcended their months of scientific partnership. "You must choose," she said simply. "Choose. Return with your people, or remain with mine." Her skin rippled with complex emotions that the universal translator couldn't capture. I cannot and will not hold you against your will when your rescue has arrived. The choice must be yours. Marcus felt the weight of the decision like a physical pressure. Earth represented everything familiar, his career, his species, his home. But the Citadel had become something else entirely, a place of discovery beyond anything a human scientist could dream, and Lysandra. Lysandra had evolved from captor to research partner to something he couldn't quite define. If I leave, he said carefully, your people will continue their decline. Yes. Her answer held no manipulation, only truth. And if I stay? You become truly part of the ascendancy, not as property or specimen, but as the bridge between our species. The first human ambassador to the HFY, with all the privileges and responsibilities that entails. She moved closer, her towering form casting prismatic shadows across the laboratory floor. Including continued participation in research that may save my people. The communication system chimed for a third time. Earth vessels have entered defensive formation, the automated voice announced. They are demanding response within 10 standard minutes. Marcus looked at the holographic display where his brain scan still hovered, then back to the image of the Earth ships. 2 worlds, 2 futures, balanced on the edge of his decision. Open a channel to the Earth vessels, he said finally. Lysandra's skin dimmed, but she nodded to the system to execute his command. The viewing port shifted, and the familiar face of Captain Alvarez appeared, her expression a mixture of relief and determination. Dr. Reed. Thank God you're alive. We're preparing an extraction team now. Hold tight. Captain, Marcus replied, straightening his posture. I appreciate the rescue effort, but there's been a misunderstanding. Alvarez frowned. Are you under duress? Blink twice if. No duress, Marcus interrupted. I'm here as a scientific liaison between humanity and the HFY ascendancy. My work here is vital to both our species. Behind Alvarez, he could see the confused faces of his former colleagues. People who had mourned him, then searched for him, now confronted with his apparent defection. Marcus, Alvarez said, dropping formality. What are you saying? He glanced at Lysandra, who remained silent, allowing him this moment without interference. In her alien features, he saw respect, perhaps the first truly equal exchange between them. I'm saying I choose to stay, Marcus answered, his voice steady despite the enormity of the decision. As Earth's first ambassador to the HFY. Tell the EDF that Queen Lysandra extends an invitation for formal diplomatic relations. Alvarez began to protest, but Marcus continued. The knowledge here, Captain, it's beyond anything we've encountered. Medical technology, astrophysics, dimensional theory. This isn't just about my choice. It's about humanity's future among the stars. The transmission ended with Alvarez's stunned expression frozen on the screen before fading to darkness. In its place, the twin moons of Theraxia shone through the viewing port, completing another convergence in their celestial dance. You surprise me, Marcus Reed, Lysandra said finally, her telepathic voice carrying notes of genuine wonder. Few beings in my long reign have done so. I'm a scientist, he replied with a small smile. Surprising discoveries are my specialty. As the Earth vessels maintained their position, neither advancing nor retreating, Marcus knew the true work was just beginning. Tomorrow would bring Mevis's challenge in the Council, diplomatic negotiations with Earth, and continued research on the failing crystalline cores. But for now, in this moment suspended between worlds, he stood not as captive or specimen, but as the unexpected bridge between stars. Between the fate he'd been born to and the one he now chose, with all its vast and beautiful uncertainty. In the reflection of the viewing port, he caught sight of himself standing beside the towering form of Queen Lysandra, their silhouettes merged by the starlight into a single, impossible shadow. Perhaps they were both right, Lysandra with her determination to preserve what was, and Mevis with his vision of what might be. Perhaps evolution and preservation were not opposing forces but complementary ones, a truth that only a being caught between worlds could fully comprehend.